Hello, and welcome to the first lesson of the Dialogic Reading through Accessible Modules program, also known as the DREAM program. I am an AI avatar that will walk you through the 3 DREAM program modules that were built to support your ability to implement a language-boosting strategy when reading with your child. But before we get into the strategy's procedures, let's quickly talk about its importance and why we should care about learning it at all. First, reading with your children, otherwise known as shared reading or shared book reading, has long been considered the single most important activity for building knowledge required for success in reading. Specifically, simply reading with your children in any language can promote their language skills, their ability to tell stories, their knowledge of books, and how words are formed with various letters. All key early literacy skills that promote reading development. Additionally, reading with your children helps grow their vocabulary. When children are read to, they can learn lots of new words that they otherwise might not be exposed to in their normal lives. For example, let's say you're reading a book about the jungle. There is the opportunity for your child to learn lots of new words related to the jungle that they otherwise might not ever be exposed to, such as animal names and other related words like canopy and vines. Learning what these words mean helps children better comprehend stories that include those words and helps add them to their own expressive vocabulary. So, simply reading books with your children has lots of important benefits. However, how much children benefit from reading with you depends on how you read with them, not just how much time you spend reading with them. One specific strategy that has been studied quite a bit and is very helpful for child language and early literacy development is known as dialogic reading. Dialogic reading is great because adults and parents can effectively use the strategy without needing a degree or without being an excellent reader themselves. In fact, dialogic reading can be completed without reading the words at all. With just a small amount of training, anyone can do it and can really help their children become better readers. Dialogic reading is a strategy that changes the dynamic during shared book reading away from one in which you read the book while your child sits and listens quietly. Instead, it emphasizes engagement and interaction and encourages the child to become a storyteller while the adult acts as a facilitator and supportive listener. Dialogic reading has been studied for decades across many languages, and regardless of what language an adult provides dialogic reading in, it is useful for promoting a child's ability to identify different letters and sounds, facilitates their ability to say longer and more complex sentences, and increases the size of their vocabulary. Also, dialogic reading has been shown to be beneficial for children with delayed language abilities, as well as for children with more advanced language. All children can benefit from it. As a result of these benefits, children who are exposed to dialogic reading early in their lives have been found to have better reading skills later in life when compared to children who are not exposed to dialogic reading. So now that we have talked about why it is important to read with your kids and why dialogic reading is a useful strategy, let's get into how you can use dialogic reading when reading with your children. Again, dialogic reading can be completed in English, Spanish, or any other language. Use the language with which you and your child are most comfortable. Reading with your children in one language will not harm or slow your child's development of other languages. In fact, it will actually help their language development in other languages as well. So how does dialogic reading work? Well, dialogic reading is often first taught using the mnemonic PEER. In PEER, the P stands for prompt or question that we can ask the child while reading to get them to participate and to get them talking. The first E stands for evaluating the child's response to your question. The second E is to expand on the child's answer. And finally, the R stands for repeating the initial prompt to give the child another chance to respond using your expanded model. We'll break down each step in this lesson and module, and we'll provide you with examples of different types of questions you can ask in modules 2 and 3. But really, the important thing for you to remember is that the goal of PEER is to maximize engagement and interaction while reading with your child. We want to get the child involved and participating while reading and to create a fun and engaging environment. Now we can go through each step individually and provide you with some examples. The first P stands for prompt. It is important because without it, none of the following steps of peer are possible. So, while reading a book with your child, simply stop reading the text at different times to ask a question and get the child involved in some way. Many prompts can be asked while looking at the pictures in a book, and some examples of a prompt include questions like asking, "What is this thing?" while pointing at a picture, or saying, "Tell me what's happening in the picture." Or a prompt can be asking your child a question about the book, such as, "Who went to the circus?" Again, we will review specific types of questions in the next two modules, but there are lots of different ways to initiate that engagement with your child, and that is the focus with the initial P in peer. Now, after we have provided that important initial prompt, we wait for the child to respond. After the child responds, you can use the first E in peer, which stands for evaluate. It is simply telling your child if their response was correct or incorrect. Also, it is important to note that we can always evaluate the child's answer gracefully and ensure that the environment is still fun and not super serious. We can say things like, "Yeah, great job, that's right," or say, "Oh, close, not quite." Once we have evaluated their response, we can move on to the second E in peer. The second E in peer stands for expand. This is another really important part of the peer sequence. After we evaluate their response, we can then add a model of correct and more complex language by adding to the child's response. So let's say we ask the question, "What is this?" and the child says ball. We can evaluate that response by saying, "Oh yeah, you're right," and then expand on their answer by saying, "That's a big red ball." By doing this, the hope is that we can support a child to use some of those words and more complicated or longer sentences when we ask them another question later. Another example could be you asking, "What is he doing?" and then the child says jump. You could then first evaluate that answer as being correct and then expand by saying, "The man jumped high on the trampoline." The expansion is important because it provides your child with a strong example of good and appropriate language. Finally, the R in peer stands for repeat. After we provide that expanded model, we can repeat the same prompt again. So we're going to ask the same question that we asked at the beginning with the hope that the child will use some of the new language that we just modeled for them. So the whole sequence could be something like you initially asking, "What is this thing?" The child responds, "Ball." Then you evaluate it by saying yes, and then expand on it by saying, "It's a big red ball." Before finally asking the question again, "So what is it?" And we hope that after we do this for some time, the child will respond by saying, "Big red ball," rather than just ball. Finally, now that you know all the steps of peer, I want to go over some other things that may be helpful to know that also help create beneficial shared book reading experiences for both you and your child. First, before you start reading, it's nice to allow children to select what book they want to read rather than making them read any one book. They may feel more motivated to read a book they selected, so offering your child a couple of options is never a bad idea. Also, it's important to know that it's okay to sit and read the same book several times. It's actually really helpful. We'll talk about why a little later, but it's very good to read the same book or books about the same topic. It will get easier for you to implement dialogic reading as your children get more familiar with a book. Second, it's good to sit and read in a comfortable, distraction-free area. TVs and things like that can be noisy and distracting, so we want to avoid that and make it a little easier for the child to pay attention to you. Now, during reading, we always want to make sure we are keeping shared book reading a fun and exciting activity, and ensure that your child wants to keep reading with you so they can reap the benefits of the activity. Also, don't forget to use peer to prompt interactions throughout the story, and then evaluate, expand, and then repeat the question again. A good rule of thumb is to try to use peer once every 1 or 2 pages. Then after reading, it's always nice to say all done or the end and thank the child for reading with you, just to make sure that we are always keeping our reading times a positive and encouraging activity. Thank you so much for watching the DREAM Program's Module 1 Lesson 1. I hope it was helpful for teaching you about dialogic reading and peer. The remainder of this module will provide you with some examples of dialogic reading and peer in action and allow you to think about dialogic reading use with your own child. Thank you.